The week so far has been about purpose. We saw at the very first evening on Sunday that one of the things that characterized Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah is that they were purposed, that they were going to be healthy. They purposed in their minds and they didn't deviate from that purpose. And we took that idea and we said, right, if we are going to be healthy, then we are going to need to have that same resilience. We're going to need to have that same purpose, that same firm determination. We spoke about that. What we're trying to do as a Healthy Communities team is not so much give dietary advice. We're trying to change lives by changing lifestyles. So this evening is no different. We're going to take a little bit of a different detour, and we are going to have a look at the mind. How does the mind affect our bodies? How does the mind work? What is the mind? So again, thank you for coming, and we'll move on. So we have been all weekend, or all week should I say, we have been looking at principles from the scriptures, and this principle we've come every single evening. Luke chapter 16 and verse 10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And the way that we're using this principle, if this is the first time you're coming onto Zoom or watching on YouTube, is the way that we're using this principle is that if we can be faithful in keeping our cells healthy, because the cells are the smallest organism in our bodies, then if our cells are healthy, then our tissues and our organs and our systems and our whole body will be healthy. So we're seeking to be faithful in making sure that our cells are healthy. And how do we keep our cells healthy? Well, there are 5 needs of the cell. There is oxygen, water, nutrients, waste elimination, freedom from poisons. So if we can give the cells the 5 needs that they need, then we can guarantee by the grace of God that our body will be healthy. And right from the beginning, right from the start of October, we saw that ways to keep the cells healthy is that you have you trust in God because He's the manufacturer of the body. You make sure that you get open air every single day. You make sure that you have daily exercise. You make sure that you get sunlight. And here in England, we don't get much sunlight, but when we do, we need to be outside in it. If you're wanting to know how do I get the vitamin D that I should get from the sunlight, how do I get it when I don't get any sun? Well, what I want you to do is I want you to go onto YouTube, look at the master plan for healthy communities, and go through the seminars that are recorded there, and you will get the answer, a lot more answers than I can give you this evening. How else do we keep the cells healthy? We have proper rest. We talked about that last night. If we're not getting proper rest, then the body can't repair itself. Our thoughts and our emotions are all over the place because they're not being regulated by the body when it wants to do that work. Temperance. We make sure that we abstain from that which is harmful, and we use judiciously that which is good. So just because a thing is good to eat or good to drink or good to do, that doesn't mean that we overdo it. We exercise temperance. We exercise a little bit of self-restraint. And then the last element of keeping the cells healthy, how do we do that, is nutrition. And like I said, for the last 3 weeks and 3 days, we've been talking about nutrition, good nutrition. Where do you get good nutrition from? What happens if you put bad nutrition in? And another quote that we've been quoting every evening, pretty much, it comes from the book Ministry of Healing, page 127, and it says, disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. And then last night we added on a little bit more from that same statement. It says, in case of disease, the cause should be ascertained. So now we understand, okay, this is how I'm supposed to take care of my body. And if I get sick, then my first port of call is not necessarily medication. It's the education that I've learned over the last 3 weeks and 3 days. What law have I been violating? So that's, again, a little synopsis of what we've been going through. So let's continue for this evening. Our first principle for this evening comes from the book of Romans. It's in the New Testament, and the writer was a man named Paul. And he said, "Know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants you are to whom you obey?" So that first part of the statement is quite clear. In fact, the whole statement is clear. It says, "Whoever you yield yourselves servants to, that's whose servants you are." He continues and says, "Whether of sin unto death or obedience unto righteousness." We're going to take that principle and we're going to say, I'm going to say that if you are yielding to the emotions that you have, the negative emotions that you have, then you will continue to be a slave to those emotions. If you are yielding to the urges to eat the bad food, then you're going to be a slave to that bad food. What's going to happen is when you feel down and when you feel like you can't go on, or when you feel a little bit upset, you're going to go to that thing that makes you feel good. So again, Paul says, "Know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants you are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or obedience unto righteousness." Now that word yield I've put in yellow because yielding doesn't begin with the action. Yielding begins with a thought process. When you yield, you have first accepted in your mind that this is what I want to do, or this is what I'm going to do, and then the action follows. So again, the thought first and then the action. So let me ask you a question. What is the mind? What is the mind? You can put it in the chat, whether you're on YouTube, or you're on Zoom. What is the mind? What is the mind? So while you're doing that, the mind is not the brain. The mind is not the brain. The mind exists through the hydroelectrical mechanisms of the brain. So let me say that again. The mind is not the brain. The mind exists through the hydroelectrical mechanisms of the brain. So if you're into computers, if you know anything about, if you've got a smartphone, the phone itself is the hardware, the physical hardware, but the processes that take place because of the hardware is almost like what the mind is. It exists because there is electric running through the hardware, causing the processes to take place. So again, the mind is not the brain. The mind exists through hydroelectrical mechanisms in the brain. So let's take a closer look at the brain. And when I learned this quite a few years ago, what I'm about to show to you, I was blown away. I was blown away because I didn't realize at the time how complex this piece of machinery is, and not just the machinery, not just the body, but the brain, the hard drive. I didn't realize how incredibly complex the brain was. And when I was growing up, I heard that, yeah, we had this computer and this computer. There was no such thing as iPhone. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi when I was growing up. But there were computers that could do amazing things. And now we have computers that are smaller than our fingernail. But when I began to understand the power that is housed in this head, in all of our heads, I was blown away. So let me share it with you. Your brain can process over 30 billion bits of information per second. Let me say that again. Your brain can process over 30 billion bits of information per second. Now, that might not mean much to you at the moment, but let me try and elaborate on that a little bit. So while you're listening to me, your brain is working, and it's working actively, because what you're doing, or what your brain is doing, is number one, it's taking information from the eyes and feeding into your brain. It's taking information from the ears and feeding into your brain. And your brain then is deciphering and computing and calculating what you're hearing and what you're seeing. And not only is it computing the words that I'm saying, but it's computing the way that I'm saying those words. So if I decided to speak a little bit quicker like this, then you'd probably think, why is he speaking so quickly? But if I decided to slow down a little bit and whisper, then your brain is picking all of that stuff up. and it's making adjustments, and it's giving information on how to process the information that is coming in. And when it's coming in, that information is coming thick and fast. You're listening to my words, you're processing my speech, you're processing my accent, you're processing the way that I say the words, you're processing inflection, you're processing speed of sound. All of that is happening simultaneously. Your brain can process over 30 billion bits of information per second. Your brain has over 6,000 miles of wiring. Again, that is immense. And I'll tell you why. Because from England to Jamaica, or Jamaica to England, where my people are from, is nearly 4,500 miles. 4,500 miles. And my brain has more wiring than England to Jamaica. In fact, I checked. England to California, which is a little bit further, is only 5,200 miles. So our brains have more wiring that stretches from England to California, England to Jamaica, all wrapped up in this head, all wrapped up in this brain. It doesn't stop there. Your brain houses 28 billion neurons which communicate with each other over 100,000 miles of nerve fibers. Now we're starting to get into numbers that we can't really compute. But all of this is taking place as in your head. Sorry, all of this is in your head, and all of this information is taking place in your head while I'm speaking to you. When I'm silent, your brain is computing. Why is he silent? What is he trying to communicate? What's the emphasis that he's trying to communicate to us? And you don't think about this. You just hear me, you see the words on the screen, you hear what I'm saying, and you're computing. Your brain's computing. Now, your neurons have you have about 28 billion neurons. Nerves that conduct electrical impulses. Let me say that again. You have about 28 billion neurons, nerves that conduct electrical impulses. You heard me say just a few moments ago that our brain, we are hydroelectrical mechanisms. We need electric, we need water. And this is why we need salt in the body, because that salt helps to that process, the hydroelectrical impulses. It helps that. But as you've learned, there are some good salts and there are some bad salts. So you have about 28 billion neurons, nerves that conduct electrical impulses. Each one of those neurons and those processes 1 billion bit of information. So again, I already know that these numbers are hard to compute. And like I said, I've learned this. I'm not a neuroscientist. When I read it, I was blown away. What else? Information from one single neuron can travel to up to 700,000 other neurons in less than 20 milliseconds. That's why last night when we talked about cortisol being released in the body, it's the body's natural alarm system. That's why the moment you sense danger, boom, cortisol is released and you start to feel tense. Happens in a fraction of a second. That's because the neurons are firing. You're in immediate danger. You realize, you know what, unless I do something, something's going to have to change, or something's going to have to happen. And all of these things are happening in your brain, one after the other, quickly. One neuron communicating with another neuron, or 700,000 neurons, in less than 20 milliseconds. Now, this video, the reason why I've put this video in is if I wanted to travel from England to 6,000 miles away, the plane flies at 600 miles an hour. It's going to take me 10 hours to travel 6,000 miles. It's going to take me 10 hours to travel 6,000 miles at 600 miles an hour. and the information in the brain is taking a lot less than 10 hours, and it's traveling a lot further. So here is the other principle, the next principle that I want to share with you. Psalm 139 verse 14. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, if you believe that, I just want you to type in the chat, I believe it. Just from what I've showed you already, if you believe that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, I just want you to put in the chat, I believe it. Now remember, every product has an owner's manual. And the owner's manual will tell you about the product. It will tell you about the manufacturer. It will tell you about how to keep the product in good working order. It will tell you what to do should the product break down. Excellent. I can see. I believe it. It will tell you what to do when the product breaks down. And the beauty about the Bible is that we know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, here's the other thing. If you've ever been to an art gallery, and you've looked at a beautiful piece of art, and or you've ever seen some of these drawings that artists create with pencil or pen, you look at the art and you're like, wow, that is an amazing piece of art. You have admiration for the art. You have admiration for the picture. You have admiration for the painting. You have admiration for the sculpture. But you have more admiration for the mind behind the picture, the mind that created the picture, the mind that created the painting, the mind that created the sculpture or the building. While we have admiration for the art itself, we have more admiration for the mind that created that piece of art. And it's no different with the scriptures. We are fearfully, wonderfully made. And when we understand that, when we realize that, it should give us a deeper appreciation for the mastermind that had the master plan for our health. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. So we're going to go to our case study again, the book of Daniel. And we're going to look at, two chapters. We're not even going to do as much as we've done previously, but we're going to begin to look at certain things that took place in these narratives, that took place in these case studies. And then we're going to see how Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah reacted to these situations. And we're going to begin to ask ourselves, how is it that they made the decisions that they made when they were in those situations? So the first case study, or the first narrative that we're going to read, comes from Daniel chapter 3. Now in Daniel chapter 3, same king, Nebuchadnezzar, we saw him in Daniel chapter 1, where he was trying to give Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah food that they knew was going to be no good for them. We met him in Daniel chapter 2 when he got angry because he wanted information that his paid advisors couldn't give him. And we meet him again in Daniel chapter 3. And in Daniel chapter 3, completely different scenario. In Daniel chapter 3, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, the head of state, has decided, you know what? Because I am the greatest monarch in this world, because I have so much power, I think I'm going to create something that will show allegiance, or will show me who shows allegiance to me by bowing down to this image. So Nebuchadnezzar decides, I'm going to make an image, and I'm going to call everybody. I'm going to call the sheriffs. I'm going to, if you have a Bible actually, and you go to Daniel chapter 3, you can read this. He says, I'm going to call everybody in my realm. I'm going to call the sheriffs. I'm going to call the musicians. I'm going to call the governors. I'm going to call the prime ministers. Everybody in my realm is going to come, and he's going to show me allegiance by bowing down and worshiping this image that I've set up. And just so people know that I'm serious about this, if they choose not to do it, then I'm going to put a death decree on their head. So that's what he does. He makes this image, and he sets it up and he puts it in a plane large enough for everybody in his realm to come. And then he makes this decree, he makes this command, and the command is, when you hear the music, that's your cue to bow down and worship this image. It's a little bit like if you ever join us while the countdown is on, you know that when you see the countdown and you hear that music, the program's about to start. No different in Daniel chapter 3. When you hear the music, the king says, you fall down and you worship. The problem was that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were in the crowd. And just like in Daniel chapter 1, they said, you know what? We're not going to do this. We can't do this. We're Jews, and we understand that the Bible says, and God himself has said, do you know what? You don't worship anybody or anything other than me. You don't bow down and worship them. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were strengthened from the decision, the purpose that they made in Daniel 1. They were strengthened for this particular situation in Daniel chapter 3. So the music plays and everybody bows down. Everybody, that is, except Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And then what happens is that one of the king's workers goes back to the king and says, King, do you know what? There are 3 guys that you've got in your government who you actually brought as slaves and you've promoted them. There are 3 guys who are just going against the grain. They're going against what everybody else is doing. And they're not bowing down. And the king gets angry. And he calls them and they go to him. And then he says, do you know what, guys? I'm paraphrasing. I like you. So I'm going to give you another opportunity. But just so you know I'm serious, I'm going to heat the fire 7 times hotter. Just so you know that although I like you, I'm serious. And so what he does, he gives them another opportunity. But then I want you to notice what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what they say. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand. Let me stop there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were actually practicing the first part of God's plan, which is godly trust. They said, King, you don't even need to give us another opportunity. We've already purposed in our heart, we've already made up our minds that we are not going to do what you asked us to do. And should you decide that you want to throw us in the fire, guess what? The God that we serve is able to keep us from dying in that fiery furnace. But then they continue, and then they say, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So I want you to notice what's happening here. Because of the firm determination that they practiced with regards to their diet in Daniel chapter 1, when they come to a situation that is life-threatening, because they've practiced that behavior, they're willing to say, do you know what, king? We respect you, and whatever you would have told us to do, as long as it didn't violate the law of God, we would have done it. But what you're asking us to do actually violates the law of God. Therefore, we cannot do it. As much as we respect you, we cannot do it. And if it ends up that you're going to have to punish us, so be it. Our God is able to take us out of that punishment. But if not, we're still not going to do it. And so what happens is the king says, okay, put them into the fire. And they go into the fire, and the Bible says that they threw 3 men in, but the king sees 4. And the king, the pagan king, says, do you know what? That 4th person looks like the Son of God. I want you to think about that. Again, in Daniel chapter 1, they were true to God and God stood for them. In Daniel chapter 2, they were true to God and God stood for them. In Daniel chapter 3, they're true to God and God stands for them. And then it says, and the princes and the governors and the captains and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, Nor was an hair on their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. They exercised their purpose. They exercised their belief and their trust in God, and God delivered them. But what I want you to understand is that decision or that behavior didn't happen on the plain of Jura. That was something that they practiced long before. In fact, I would dare say that they practiced that even before they got into Babylon. They were practicing that as young people. They were practicing that every opportunity that they had to practice, what's the word I'm looking for? Purpose. They practiced it, so that when they came to a situation that called upon that situation, that resolve, it was there. There is a statement that says a crisis doesn't develop character, it just reveals who you really are. A crisis doesn't develop character, it just reveals who you really are. So that's our first narrative. We saw that when a situation arose, because purpose and firm determination was practiced prior to a situation, when it was called upon, it was there. Now, in Daniel chapter 3, Daniel isn't there. But in Daniel chapter 6, Daniel's situation, Daniel's opportunity to practice his firm determination is brought to the front. Now, in Daniel chapter 6, it's a different king. It's no longer Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has passed away, and there is a new king in the realm of Babylon. And this new king's name is Darius. And Darius likes Daniel. If you read Daniel chapter 6, you'll see that Darius actually likes Daniel, so much so that he promotes him to be second in the kingdom. So check this, just before I move on. Daniel came to Babylon as a slave, and now he's second in command. Because Daniel's firm purpose, firm determination governed his life, so much so that the people who saw him recognized this man stands for principle. So, here's how it goes. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel's peers in his workplace were jealous of him, didn't like him. And they said, you know what? We got to get rid of this guy because he's actually a slave. We were aristocratic from the beginning. We were born like that. But this guy's a slave. What's he doing taking our jobs? What's he doing at the second of command? So we need to get rid of him. But then the narrative goes on and says, you know what? They try to find a situation in Daniel's work, in the way that he conducted himself. And the narrative says, the case study says, they couldn't find anything. Daniel was just so meticulous, so true to principle, so true to purpose that they couldn't find anything. But what they did know about Daniel was that Daniel was highly religious. Daniel was highly religious, and they realized that, hold on a second, the only way that we're going to be able to get this guy out of this situation and even take his life is if we create a situation that's going to cause him or force him to go against his principles. So that's what they did. They said to the king, we've hatched no, they didn't say we've hatched a plan. They said, we've all discussed and we've decided that what we think you should do is make a law that nobody can worship their God or pray to their God for 30 days. Only worship you and only pray to you. And the king thought, that's a really good idea, guys. That's a really good idea. Let it be so. What the king didn't know is that they were actually setting up his friend Daniel. And the Bible says that when Daniel found out, Daniel didn't hesitate about what he should do. It says that now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. So let me just unpack that a little bit. Daniel, when he realized what was taking place, he could have said, you know what, man, My life is on the line if I don't do this thing. I know what I'll do. I'll close my windows and I will pray in secret. I can still pray to God with my windows closed. That's not an issue. I could do that. But the Bible says that he didn't do that. He kneeled upon his knees. In fact, he opened his window. He kneeled upon his knees and he prayed 3 times a day and gave thanks to his God as he did aforetime. Daniel did exactly what he would do normally, even though he knows that at this time he's doing it, it's against the law of the land. This is because Daniel had practiced purpose and firm determination to be true to his God no matter what happened. So, as you continue to read the narrative, the surveillance sees him and reports back to the king. He says, "King, do you remember that you made a law that nobody should worship any other god save you?" "Yeah, I remember that." "Well, let me tell you that your friend, Daniel, the one who's of the children of Israel, the slave, he's actually been praying 3 times a day to his God. And you remember, King, that you said that anybody who does that should be thrown into the lion's den." At that point, Darius the king understands what's happened. He understands, I've been set up. And he tries to reverse the laws that have been put in place. But one of the things about the laws of the Medes and the Persians, that it doesn't alter. Not even the king can change it. So the king tries all night to get his friend off the hook, but he can't. And the other advisors say, right, we've got Daniel now, because we knew he was going to be true to purpose. We knew that he was meticulous and he was highly religious, and he wasn't going to do anything that was going to jeopardize his relationship with God. We saw how he acted in Daniel chapter 1 with the food. We saw how he bought himself time. He wasn't stressed when everybody else was stressed. And we knew that this is what he was going to do. So let's see how he gets out of this one. So the king reluctantly has to put Daniel into the lion's den. But the king fasts all night because he knows Daniel's character. And he realizes, you know what? Daniel's God can save him. This king isn't a Jew, doesn't worship Daniel's God like Daniel does. But because of Daniel's example, because of Daniel's meticulousness in his work, because Daniel was so purposed, it was an actual witness to the king. So the night passes, and early in the morning, the king goes to the place where Daniel is and says, "Daniel, has your God, who is able to save you, has he saved you?" Listen what Daniel says. "My God have sent his angel and have shut the lion's mouth, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, I have done no hurt." Daniel practiced godly trust. Daniel practiced what he had always been practicing before now. So those two narratives have highlighted 2 things. Number 1, when we find ourselves in a situation, whatever we have put in is going to come out. Whatever we have put in is going to come out. And number 2, that when we are true to purpose, when we are true to what God has, what we understand to be right, and we do what is right, even if no one else is doing it, God stands for us. You heard me say yesterday, garbage in, garbage out. So let's go back to our brains. So I shared with you that information is running, is circulating through our brains at lightning speeds. One neuron can send an piece of information, multiple pieces of information, to 700,000 other neurons in 20 milliseconds, in a fraction of a second. What I didn't tell you at that time was that the information isn't just connected tip to tip. What you can see on your screen are what we call synapses. Now, synapses are the nerve endings where the information passes from one neuron to another. And there is a gap in the middle, a clear space in the middle. So the information passes from one synapse to another through space with none of the information missing. And it happens at a fraction of a fraction of a second. Now again, that is, for me at least, is mind-blowing. That no information is lost through over that gap. Now imagine you're in a situation that has triggered the fight or flight. And the brain is calculating speed, it's calculating distance, it's calculating height, it's calculating all of these different things. And by chance, not by chance, something happens and piece of that information gets lost and you forget how to move your legs. What would happen? What would happen if you were meant to jump over the fence because the fight or flight response has been triggered and a piece of information has been lost when it's traveling from one synapse to another and you forget how to jump or you forget how to climb? It'd be all over. Again, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't know any computer, even the ones that are keeping the planes in the sky, even the ones that are working now so that I can talk to you from the comfort of my own home and you can listen in the comfort of your own home. The information is going up into the sky, coming back down and being beamed across the world. Even with that kind of technology and that kind of power, it does not rival what's in our head. It does not rival the complexity of the brains that we have and the minds that is housed in the brain. So let's go a little bit deeper. Again, I'm not a neuroscientist. This is just things that I've learned and I've tried to simplify it as much as I could. So roughly three parts of the brain. The frontal lobe of the brain is very important. It is a very important part of the complex cognitive processing system and has many connections to different areas of the brain. It is responsible for decision making, planning of new situations, resisting temptations, and habitual responses. Now, the frontal part of the frontal lobe of the brain is where we make decisions. It's where we process the information that we receive. So the words that I'm speaking to you, your brain is sifting it. Is what he's saying plausible? Is what he's saying correct? Is what he's saying making sense? If I said to you, 1 + 1 = 3, automatically your brain's like, nah, something's gone wrong here. Because you know that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3. How do you know that? Because for a lifetime, your brain has been learning that calculation. So now when somebody asks you 1 + 1, you go 2. You don't even think about it. 100 + 100, 200. You don't even think about it. Because the brain has learned, I'm not quite sure which word to use. The brain has learned that calculation. So as soon as it hears it, boom, result. So the frontal lobe is the most important, one of the most important parts of our mind, because that's where we sift through information. That's where we accept or reject information. And it's interesting to me that we live in a technological age where information is just being pumped at us. Boom, boom, boom. Every day, every second of the day. Whether we're on our iPads, our iPhones, whether we're at work, whether we're driving down the street, whether we're in the supermarket, information is just being thrown at us. Left, right, and center. You can't get away from it. And most of that information, you don't even actually process. But what you do have control over is what you let in. And the frontal lobe acts like the guards at Buckingham Palace. If there's danger, the frontal lobe will say, do you know what, there's danger, guys. We need to do something. If there's false information that you know is false, boom, you reject it. And this is why it's so important to be, in fact, let me leave that alone because it's going to come up a little bit later. So the frontal lobe is responsible for decision making, planning of new situations, resisting temptations, and habitual responses. So Daniel chapter 3, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that was a habitual response. Daniel chapter 6, Daniel's response was habitual. It was habitual. So they didn't have to think about, should I bow? Should I pretend to tie my shoelaces and just look like no, no, no. That didn't even come into their mind. Because they trained their mind to be purposeful, to be resisting of temptation, to be truthful to God. They practiced that. So that when they were in a situation, it was just a normal response. It was a normal response. So then you have another section of the brain called the limbic system. The limbic system. Now, the limbic system is different to the frontal lobe because the limbic system is the home of emotions, of motivation, the regulation of memories, the interface between the emotional states and the memories of physical stimuli, the fight or flight responses, and some decision systems. And you'll understand why it's some. The limbic system of the brain does not think, it just reacts to emotional stimuli. So let me break that down. The limbic system responds to stimulus. The frontal lobe responds to information and you sift through that information. The limbic system, however, is an interesting part of the brain because it doesn't sift, it just reacts. Doesn't sift, it just reacts. So you're walking into a supermarket and you're not thinking about the music that's playing over the stereo or over the PA system, but you're walking through a few aisles and you start humming the tune, but you weren't thinking about it. Or you're walking down the road and a car drives past and you hear the bass line and your head starts nodding and you start moving. You've not thought about that, but your limbic system has picked that up and it's responded. You pick up. Here's a good one. So where I live, sometimes when we go for a walk, there's a big billboard, and the billboard has on it. It might be in other British cities, probably in other British cities. Has a picture of a person holding a chicken leg, and like their eyes are like not glazed over, but something like that, denoting that this person is really enjoying that. And you glance at it and you've not really processed it, but your mind's working. Your mind's working. And if you no longer eat KFC, you're like, that looks pretty good. And then you've got to catch yourself because the frontal lobe has kicked in and said, no, you know that's saturated fat. You know that's high in salt. And you're like, okay, yeah, let's keep going. That's because the two systems are fighting against each other because you've practiced that and you know that this is not going to be healthy. But the limbic system says, yeah, but it tastes good. Or you pick up a piece of chocolate that you haven't picked up for ages and you taste it and all these memories come flooding back. That's because the limbic system has been stimulated. Or another good one, you visit a country and you come back to your home country and then you're walking down the road and you get a smell, and it takes you right back to the country you just visited, or it takes you right back to your childhood. Or you hear something, you're like, ooh. And all the memories that are connected with that taste or that smell or that hearing come flooding back. Think about this. Everything that you've ever heard, seen, tasted, touched is stored up here. It's stored up in the brain. The reason why you don't remember it is because it's not being accessed. But should something trigger that memory, it all comes flooding back. It all comes flooding back. So then you have the conscious brain. The conscious mind, sees with the senses. The conscious mind sees with the senses. It perceives outside experiences that are taken into our minds. So, our eyes, our ears, our mouths, our sensory organs, our taste, those senses feed the conscious mind. It feeds the conscious mind. That's how the conscious mind sees, through our senses. The subconscious mind, however, doesn't see. It's blind to the outside world. All it does is receive information. All it does is receive information. So it receives it from the conscious mind, and the conscious mind receives information from your senses. And you're going to see how powerful this is. So think about the subconscious mind as the storehouse, the filing cabinet. It just receives what's given to it. So the subconscious mind is blind. Subsequently, the conscious mind does not know the difference between reality and imagination. Now, I think I heard Jackie speak about this last week. So let me share with you a study that was done. So they wanted to find out how the brain actually worked and what were the different things that took place in the brain under different stimuli. So what they did is there was a study where they put a monkey behind a glass, watching another monkey eating peanuts or eating food. And what happened was when they put the electrodes on the head, and the monkey, no, let me go backwards. The first monkey, they gave that monkey nuts, and that monkey was eating the nuts. And they realized that the monkey's brain was firing because he was eating the nuts. He was having pleasure from eating the nuts. The second half of the study, the monkey that had originally ate the nuts was placed behind a glass, and they put another monkey with the nuts, and the original monkey was watching the other monkey eat the nuts. And guess what happened? The same thing happened in the monkey's brain that was just watching it. The same parts of the brain were firing because the monkey could see what was happening, but his brain couldn't detect whether or not he was eating the nuts or he was watching the other monkey eating the nuts. Now this is really potent because our brains are somewhat similar. We don't have monkeys' brains. We are far more superior than monkeys, but they work similarly in that our subconscious just receives information. So let me put it like this. If you are accustomed, or if a person is accustomed to watching negativity, if a person is accustomed to watching violence, if a person is accustomed to watching killing or adultery or swearing or people just getting frustrated, then what is happening is that the subconscious is just taking that information in, and it doesn't know that you're watching it or doing it yourself. And what it does, it just stores that information. It just stores it until it's accessed. Then you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, and your immediate response is to curse them out. You didn't think about it. You hadn't thought about the words that you were going to say. So how did that come out? It's because that behavior had been practiced not by you yourself, but by the people that you were watching. Somebody says something to you and you feel like you want to punch them in the face. You've never punched anyone in the face physically. So where is that thought come from? It's come from you watching somebody being punched in the face on a TV series. And because the person being punched in the face was the baddie, you didn't think anything of it. You thought, yeah, that should happen because he's done bad. What you didn't realize is that you were programming yourself to behave like that should you get in that same situation. And that's how deep what you watch, what you listen to, what you taste, what you hear, or what you touch, that's how deep it goes. Because you're creating neurological pathways in the brain. And just like Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, when a situation comes up, whatever you've put in is going to come out. So I want you to listen to this. I found this video quite a few years ago, and it's very, very potent.
We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together. They lose their long-term relationship because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort.
So did you hear that? Nerves that fire together wire together. But nerves that don't fire together don't wire together. So if a person is accustomed to watching violence and they get pleasure from that, then the nerves that conduct pleasure and violence are going to fire together. So when you get into a situation, you're not going to think about, or a person's not going to think about, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I'm inflicting pain on someone. No. Because they're fired together, because they're wired together, they're going to fire together. But let's just say that a person says, you know what, I actually realized that I was inflicting pain on this person and I'm so remorseful and I need to change my habits. The first thing that they need to do is cut off the stimuli that causes those nerves to fire together. So that will be getting rid of the violence that they're watching, getting rid of the violence that they're listening to. And over time, those neurological pathways, those nerves will begin to separate. Now, here's the thing about the brain. Once you've made a neurological pathway, you can't unmake it. It's a little bit like walking through a field and so in the park near me, when I walk through the grass, you can see where the other people have walked because the grass is laid down flat. You can see it. I can't go back and pick the grass up. It's impossible. If I want somebody else to go a different way, I'm going to have to travel a different way. I'm going to have to make another pathway. And if people continue to follow my pathway or the pathway that I've made and not the other one, over time, that old pathway will become overgrown and it will become dormant. And so it is with our brains and our neurological pathways. If we want to begin to change behaviors, we can't undo what we've done. We can't unsee what we've seen. We can't unhear or untaste what we've heard. We'd have to travel a different direction. We have to travel a different direction. So here's the question on the screen. How can we renew our minds? How can we get to the place where we habitually do what is right, habitually make the right decision, even though we may be under stress, even though we may be in a situation that stresses other people out? How do we begin to do that? So here are some more principles from the owner's manual called the Bible. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Now that word heart isn't talking about the organ that's pumping the blood around my body. It's actually talking about the mind. And it says, keep thy heart with all diligence, which means you're going to have to be a soldier, a sentinel over what you allow in your eyes, what you allow in your ears, what you allow your hands to touch, what you allow yourself to smell, what you allow yourself to taste. Because each one of those senses, each one of those information that come through those senses is creating a neurological pathway. Each one of those informations that's coming through those channels is creating a network of nerves that fire together. And if we don't want them to fire together, we've just heard that we have to, if we don't want them to wire together, we have to stop them from firing together. So again, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it, out of the mind, are the issues of life. We only speak what we've put in. We only say, we only do what we've trained ourselves to do. There are some things that we say, some habits that we do that we don't even think about. It's just a natural response. There are some people, when they see somebody in danger, it's their automatic response to go and help. There are some people that when they see something that they shouldn't see, automatically it's switched off. When they hear something that they shouldn't hear, oh, no, gone the other way. It's become a habitual response. And remember, that doesn't happen at the time that you're being tested. That happens through the purpose and this firm resilience that has taken place and that has built up over the period. Peter says it this way: gird up the loins of your mind, which means the frontal lobe. Put a guard up. Make sure that whatever comes to your frontal lobe doesn't just pass through into your limbic system, into your subconscious. No. Make sure you're evaluating everything that comes to your mind. Every piece of information that comes to your eyes, your ears, your taste, your touch. You need to guard it, because nobody's going to guard it for you. And because we live in the kind of world we live in, you're bombarded day after day with things that are going to take your mind in a different direction. And unless you are constantly battling, the nerves are going to fire together, and they're going to wire together, and they're going to become a neurological network. So again, gird up the loins of your mind. The same person that wrote Ministry of Healing also wrote a book called Acts of the Apostles. And she says it like this: guard well the avenues of the soul. Guard well the avenues of the soul. By now, I hope you understand what the avenues to the soul are, what the avenues to the mind. What are the avenues of the mind and to the mind? It's your senses. It's your senses. Whatever is lodged in the mind, whatever is stored in the mind, has come through the senses. And this is why we have to be so very careful, not only as adults, but as children. With children, should I say. Because children's minds are still being written, still being processed. The things that you put in there are going to create and develop the person that they're going to be later. So it's an absolute travesty that these computer games glorify killing. It's an absolute travesty that these musics that are being pushed out and promoted by so-called children-friendly artists have such lewdness and wickedness in them. Disney, Pixar, all of these different things are being pushed out on our children. And when the children get older, you're like, where did that come from? Why are you speaking like this? I told you yesterday I used to work in schools, and invariably there would be classes that I would have to sit at my desk and pray to the living God because of what was being taught. And these are on the minds of impressionable people. And we wonder, society wonders, how is society like the way it is? And I'm saying, well, just look at all the information that you're pumping out. Look at the information that's been... And the thing is, when I was young, if you wanted to do a badness, you had to go far out to find it. Now, if you want to do a badness, you can just pick up your mobile phone and it's right there in your hand. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi. The computer was locked in one space in the house. Everybody could see what you were doing. Not now. If children have smartphones, they could be talking to people right across the world. They could be doing all kinds of things right across the with strangers, with whoever. And we've heard the stories. I don't want to go into it. We've heard the stories, the horror stories. This is why it's so important to guard the mind through the avenues of the eyes, ears, mouth, nose, taste, touch. There is another principle. Psalm 101, 3. I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. The psalmist understood that there is a power in what you see. A power for good and a power for evil. So he says, you know what? I'm not even going to look at it. When if there are any young people watching, either on YouTube or on Zoom, or you're going to watch on the restream, when your friend says, yo, come look at this. If you realize that it's evil, don't be ashamed to say, you know what, no, I'm not watching that. I'm not watching that at all. Here, Job, here's another principle. Job 31, verse 1. I made a covenant, I made an agreement, I made a pact with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a fair maiden? What Job is saying is that, listen, the only woman's body that I should see is my wife. So I've made a pact, I've made a covenant, I've made an agreement with my eyes that if it's not my wife's body, I'm not looking at it. I made a covenant, I made a pact, I made an agreement with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a fair maiden? Why is the Bible so, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Why is the Bible so clear about we should be careful about what we allow into our souls, into our minds and into our souls? It's because of this, Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinketh in his heart, in his thoughts, in his mind, so is he. You've heard the saying, you are what you eat. Well, I want to add something else. You are what you think about. You are what you think about. You are what you eat. You are what you drink. You are what you think about. So Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinketh in his heart, in his thoughts, in his mind, so is he. There's another principle. They're all over the place. And this is why I said that the Bible isn't just a religious book. It's a book on health. It's a book on counseling. It's a book on so many different things. So hopefully, if you have a Bible, or if you can get hold of a Bible, take a read of it. You'll begin to see that God speaks so much more than just his son came to die. And that's paramount in the scriptures. But God is also interested in your everyday life. He's interested that you become spiritually well. He's interested that you become physically well. He's interested that you become mentally well. So as a man thinketh in his heart, in his thoughts, so is he. Here's how it says it in Matthew. For out of the abundance of the heart, out of the abundance of the mind, out of the abundance of what you've put into your mind, the mouth speaks. So if you want to understand what's inside of a person, let them speak long enough. Put them in a situation, put them in an environment where they're able to speak, and just allow them to speak. You will begin to see what is inside of that person's mind. Do you know, there are some presidents in the recent past who they didn't like to put on the podium. There are some prime ministers who they don't like to put on the podium. Why? Because they never know what's coming out of their mouth, because they've been in the situations before that when the mouth opens, things to start coming out. And once the thing's out, it's really hard to pull back. That principle is found all over the scriptures. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. For out of the abundance of the heart, out of the surplus of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if a person is constantly watching evil, constantly watching swearing, constantly watching whatever that is not godly, that is not wholesome, when they get into a situation, that swearing is going to come out, that anger is going to come out, because you've practiced that response. So let's go back to our principal text right from the beginning of this week. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. It began with Daniel purposing in his heart that he wasn't going to defile himself by what he ate, by what he listened to, by what he smelt, by what he touched, by what he saw. He wasn't going to defile himself. And that determination carried him through many other situations that came up in his life. Now, I remember Jackie said something last week, that thoughts practiced long enough become actions. Actions practiced long enough become habits. Habits become character, and character will determine where you spend your destiny. I want to add something else to that list. So Jackie said thoughts, practice long enough become actions, habits, character, destiny. Before thoughts, I want to add food. because that's what we're talking about. The food that you eat, we saw last night, we've been seeing for the last 3 weeks, directly affects the way that you think. Directly affects the way that you think. And again, remember I said that if you are eating diseased food, then you are going to, that diseased food is going to break down into diseased blood. And that diseased blood is going to feed every organ, every cell, every system of the body, which will in turn become diseased. As I said last night, you cannot get life from non-life. The living God gives the living beings living food. You cannot get life from non-life. And that's why I said it's not about meat versus non-meat. It's about life versus non-life, because there are some vegan foods, some vegetarian foods that are still dead. They're processed. There's no life in them. They may not be animal-based, but they're still dead. So that's where we need to begin to think, change our thinking. Plants, things that come from the ground, because from the ground they have roots and shoots. They can suck up the nutrients, the phosphorus, the iron, the calcium, the magnesium. We eat it, we take it into our bodies. We have healthy blood, we have healthy cells, we have a healthy body. We have a healthy mind. Healthy mind. Finally, Philippians, final principle, and I'm going to hand it over to Clive. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Whatsoever or whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, if there's goodness in it, if there is goodness in it and it's true, it's honest, it's just, it's pure, it's lovely, and if there's virtue in it, then you need to think on these things. Take away the things that are going to make you angry. Take away the stimulus that's going to make you irritable. Take away the things that are going to cause you to swear. Take away the things that are going to cause you to look where you shouldn't look. Put those things away. Put them far away. Take them out of your, burn them if you have to. Don't sell them. Don't let other people don't sell. Burn them. And replace that with the things that are true, with the things that are honest, with the things that are just, with the things that are pure, with the things that are lovely, with the things that have good report, with the things that have virtue in them. You want to think on these things, because that's how you begin to rewire the brain. That's how you begin to teach an old dog new tricks. There is no such thing as not being able to teach an old dog new tricks. The brain it has what they call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, which means you can continue learning every single day of your life until you take your last breath. The brain can continue to expand. You've probably heard we don't use a good portion of our brains. So think on these things. Think on the things. Focus on the things that are going to make you happy, healthy, prosperous people.